Hi. In the first video concerning this small frequency counter, you certainly noticed that I have used a constant level to measure the frequency response of the channels. That was the minimum specified level to cover the whole frequency range. In this video, I will show the dynamic range of the inputs and also the behavior concerning the impedance in the whole range of the device. And the results will be compared to a very capable professional frequency counter, the 53230A from Keysight. Let's start with the channel A sensitivity of the Minicounter. This graph shows the minimum levels needed for the Minicounter to show a stable and accurate frequency on the display. The minimum level declared on the specifications of the Minicounter is 25 millivolts RMS from 30 Hz to 3.6 GHz in 2 channels. But as you can see on this graph for channel A, the minimum level from 100 Hz to almost the end of the frequency range is 10 millivolts RMS or less, which in my opinion is pretty good. There's an ideal range for the minimum level specified for a frequency counter. It can't be so high so the instrument would start counting noise, and also can't be so low so you would need a huge level for the counter to start showing something useful on the display, as is the case of some low-cost counters you find on the internet. It's also important to say that a good frequency counter should measure properly the frequency from the minimum level all the way up to something near the damage level of the channel. Let's now have a look at the channel B of the Minicounter. This is the high frequency channel. The specified sensitivity is still 25 millivolts RMS, but now from 20 MHz to 3.6 GHz. The input impedance of this channel is always 50 ohms, and minus 19 dBm will correspond to about 25 millivolts RMS. Notice that from 40 MHz to about 2.7 GHz, the sensitivity is below minus 30 dBm or 7 millivolts RMS, also very good. This is the front panel of the frequency counter we'll be comparing the Minicounter to. It's the 53230A from Keysight, and this particular model has 2 low frequency channels specified as 350 MHz channels and an amazing 20 picoseconds resolution. I believe it's still the industry leader in the market. It has also the option 115 installed, which is the 15 GHz third channel. This great instrument has many other capabilities, but they are beyond the scope of this particular video. This is the level specification for the low frequency channels. 20 millivolts peak for frequencies up to 100 MHz and 40 millivolts peak for frequencies above 100 MHz, or respectively 14 millivolts RMS and 28 millivolts RMS. Now the level specification for the microwave channel. Minus 23 dBm for frequencies below 3 GHz, minus 27 27 dBm for frequencies between 3 and 11 gigahertz, and minus 21 dBm for frequencies above 11 gigahertz, or respectively 16 millivolts RMS, 10 millivolts RMS, and 20 millivolts RMS. Now the real world, and here comes a great surprise, at least for me. Channels 1 and 2, specified for 350 MHz, will accept frequencies up to 500 MHz with a sensitivity of 20 millivolts RMS, and frequencies up to 800 MHz if you overdrive the input. And here is channel 3, the microwave channel, specified for 15 gigahertz, and another surprise, with only minus 29 dBm, or about 8 millivolts RMS, it goes from 250 megahertz to about 12 gigahertz, but struggles with frequencies above 14.5 gigahertz, and actually never reaches 15 gigahertz. Now let's move on and analyze the behavior of the input impedance of the Minicounter and of the 53230A. Starting with channel 1 of the Minicounter set to 50 ohm, you can see that it's very close to 50 ohm in the whole range. When we set channel A to high impedance, we also can see that it keeps the high impedance also in the whole range. As we know, the curve being in the lower half of the Smith chart in this position means that it's slight capacitive, something also expected. Now the high frequency channel of the Minicounter. The impedance remains between 25 and 50 ohms, which means a maximum VSWR of 2. Now the 53230A. This is the impedance of channels 1 and 2 set to 50 ohm from DC to 350 megahertz, which is the maximum frequency specified. And this is the plot when you set channels 1 or 2 to high impedance. Up to 100 megahertz, it keeps a fairly high impedance, but above that, the reactive part of the impedance starts to make a big difference. And this is the impedance of the microwave channel, basically around 50 ohm. At this point, you would wonder why the impedance of the 53230A isn't more behaved and closer to 50 ohm. And the answer is because it's not that important. On the other hand, this is not the case when we are measuring power, for instance, with a spectrum analyzer. This is the same plot for the Rohde-Schwarz FSC3 spectrum analyzer. As you can see, the input impedance is more behaved, even considering that it's an entry-level instrument. Finally, you could ask why I compared a tiny homemade frequency counter with a professional and expensive unit, and the answer is to have fun, and also to show that it's possible to design and build a useful device yourself.